The view from halfway down is an exploration of BoJack's psyche, his fears, his insecurities, and it's the culmination of everything that's defined him as a person. If you haven't seen the final 8 episodes of BoJack Horseman, this is your final spoiler warning. As I'm sure you know, this episode all takes place in BoJack's mind as he's drowning in his pool. Through his near-death experience, BoJack goes on an existential exploration of accepting the life we've lived and our own mortality. BoJack walks up to what I believe is the Sugarman estate, where Beatrice grew up. Notably, BoJack has shown up to the dinner party with Sarah Lynn in tow. BoJack understandably blames himself for Sarah Lynn's death, and that's fully represented by the fact that he literally brought her to this afterlife party. The interior of the house merges many aspects of BoJack's life. We see paintings, furniture, and objects from his childhood home. The kitchen is mainly the one from Horsing Around, but it also contains aspects of his childhood kitchen. Throughout the episode, black tar drips from the ceiling, often onto BoJack himself, eventually chasing and consuming him. Back in season 1's The Telescope, Charlotte talks about Los Angeles and how it's a flashy place that sits on top of all this black tar. But in season 2's Escape from LA, she amends her feelings and tells BoJack that he's the tar pit. This seems to have manifested itself as this looming threat throughout the dream, and it eventually consumes everyone in his life, including himself. On arrival, BoJack gives his mother pink hydrangeas, and there's a lot of symbolism embedded in these flowers. In Japanese culture, hydrangeas are often associated with apology. Subconsciously, BoJack still feels guilty for leaving Beatrice in a nursing home to die. On top of this, pink hydrangeas tend to represent heartfelt emotion. This guilt and attempted apology is something BoJack genuinely feels in his heart. Other cultures have different beliefs about this flower. Victorians are known to feel negatively about hydrangeas. They represent boastfulness and vanity. These are also descriptors of Beatrice's lifestyle growing up. Historically, hydrangeas were given to people who turned down love interests, representing those people as cold and frigid. While this is certainly a dated concept, it also fits Beatrice's description. She is a cold and frigid character, particularly towards BoJack, and because of her pregnancy with BoJack, she turned down a potential love interest, Corbin Creamerman. Another interesting superstition about hydrangeas is that if they're planted near the front of your house, you might risk your daughter growing up to be a spinster, which is another dated term for an elderly, unmarried woman. Beatrice ends up leaving the hydrangeas in the front of the house, and after BoJack's tar drips into them, they grow large and obstruct the exit, trapping everyone inside. While Beatrice did end up marrying Butterscotch, I think she often felt like a spinster. She was trapped in a marriage she didn't actually want and felt like life and opportunity had passed her by. This final hydrangea observation may be a stretch, but it's interesting to note that in order for hydrangeas to grow and become pink, they must be planted in alkaline soil. Alkali is a chemical compound that's typically corrosive, perhaps a metaphor for Beatrice's attitude towards BoJack and the effect she had on his life. In the living room, there are an array of paintings and photographs that we see throughout the series. There's BoJack's family portrait, as well as Beatrice's from the old Sugarman place. There's the photo of BoJack's family at the lake house, a portrait of Crackerjack, and a framed photo of the establishing shot of the Horsing Around house. There's even the silhouette portraits of BoJack, Butterscotch, and Beatrice from his childhood home. These are obviously images that represent many aspects of BoJack's life. Beatrice's broken family and the loss of Crackerjack informed how BoJack himself was raised. Crackerjack was immortalized and put on a pedestal so that BoJack could never live up to him. BoJack's family life growing up was tumultuous, and the portrait of his family shows how disconnected they were. Then we come to some of the more interesting portraits. There's of course the Hockney that was hanging in BoJack's office in his house, the Narcissus painting, but this time, BoJack is drowned in his pool. Obvious foreshadowing into what's actually happening in this episode. But in addition to this, we see Joseph Sugarman's old painting that Beatrice gifted to BoJack after Joseph's death. This is one of the few things that Beatrice passed down to BoJack, and it's representative of his lineage, possibly his only material connection to his grandfather. And while he did hang it in his house, he didn't take great care of it. In season 1, we see that Sarah Lynn's house party guests actually drilled holes through it. Later in the episode, when we see BoJack trying to escape, we see those same holes drilled through the painting again. Now, I think the actual most interesting painting is the one we don't see until BoJack is trying to escape. Here on the wall is a young horse who looks very much like BoJack, crying while holding a clown mask. This was a painting we saw in BoJack's childhood home before Butterscotch accepted a job with the Sugarmans. This image absolutely represents BoJack and the attitude that Beatrice instilled in him as a child. When BoJack was sad or upset, he used performance as a coping mechanism. He was a clown, a jester, and those things were fueled by pain and insecurity. The painting sits on the wall, it stretches and grows before revealing the pathway to the kitchen from Horsing Around. This fully represents how this aspect of BoJack's personality led him to his life as a sitcom star, and it's brilliantly showcased as a literal doorway into his sitcom house. As Beatrice and BoJack walk into the living room, Beatrice remarks that a bird flew into the house through the window, and they're trying to chase it out. There's a lot to unpack in regards to the bird. For one, a known superstition about birds flying into houses is that they're meant to foretell an important message. But if that bird dies while still in the house, it foretells death. Other Celtic superstitions associate birds flying into houses with death as well. And though BoJack was able to chase the bird out of the house initially, it's later seen stuck within the house and dies before it's able to fly out the window. I think that it's possible there's even more to this bird's symbolism found within the 1920s novel Siddhartha. The bird's beak suggests that it's some type of songbird, and in the novel Siddhartha, a songbird is present in a dream, much like in this very episode. In Siddhartha, the songbird is dying in a golden cage, which is symbolism of the character's imprisonment in a world of wealth and luxury. The bird is effectively trapped by worldly vices. Does it sound familiar? Siddhartha's spiritual life is dying because of his worldly life, and I don't know if anything has more perfectly described BoJack Horseman as a person. Exploring the themes in Siddhartha relates even further to the ideas found in this episode. The word Siddhartha roughly translates to "he who has found meaning of existence," and the book philosophically explores what makes a meaningful life. This question is pretty directly debated at the dinner table, which brings us to our dinner guests. The first guest we see is Sarah Lynn. When they arrive, she's the cute little 3-year-old we know from the Horse and Around days, and the longer they spend in the house, the more we see her grow up. BoJack knew Sarah Lynn at every stage of her life. They worked together on Horse and Around for 9 seasons, and maintained a friendship up until her death, so it makes sense that she grows up throughout the dream. Herb is wearing the same outfit he wore when he told BoJack he was going to star in Horse and Around, a pretty important moment in BoJack and Herb's relationship, and their attitude towards each other seems to be filled with camaraderie. There's even a sequence where they perform a bit together about asking the question, "Can I ask a question?" It feels remarkably similar to a flashback scene from The Telescope when they comedically complain about the phrase, "Here's the thing."
Just say the thing. You don't need to introduce the concept that there's going to be a thing.
Corduroy Jackson is wearing the outfit we saw him in when he gave BoJack his box of autoerotic asphyxiation tools, and is presumably what he was wearing when BoJack found his body. Zach Braff is wearing what seems to be a butler's uniform, but when he died back in season 4, he was wearing a tux at Mr. Peanut Butter's black tie event. Cracker Jack is wearing his army uniform, and BoJack grew up seeing photos and portraits of him in that very uniform. Beatrice is wearing the outfit she wore to her debutante ball the same night she met Butterscotch when BoJack was conceived. While at the table, Beatrice asks BoJack if he's going to sing the Lollipop song at the show later, which is a callback to this sequence from Downer Ending.
You go out there and you do the only thing you're good for, which is singing that goddamn Lollipop song.
The last arrival to the party is Butterscotch, who in BoJack's dream has merged with Secretariat. Given that Butterscotch wasn't really around or a good father to BoJack, BoJack basically made Secretariat his role model and father figure. Each character is also eating something that in some way relates to their death or is possibly their last meal. BoJack is served pills, Corduroy the lemon he would bite down on when autoerotic asphyxiating himself, Herb ate peanuts which he was allergic to and ultimately caused his death, Beatrice has an unappetizing cafeteria style spread you might find in a nursing home, Cracker Jack a can of rations he would have eaten in the war, Sarah Lynn is eating a fast food burger and fries. Some people speculate this was the last thing she ate on her bender with BoJack. Secretariat is eating 2 eggs and a whiskey coffee, which I think may have actually been Butterscotch's last meal. The only time we saw Butterscotch eat breakfast, he was served an omelet, and we know he liked Jack, so this lines up pretty well. The dinner starts out with the guests playing a game called Best Part, Worst Part, and this really begins to get to the core of the existential questions this episode asks. The characters talk about the best and worst part of their lives, which evolves into a conversation about what makes life meaningful. It raises important philosophical questions like, is sacrifice inherently good? Is bringing joy to others through art and media important? Is authenticity? If you get joy out of the things you do, are they actually selfish? These questions are all intelligently explored through the characters who properly represent them, all while BoJack explores if his life was ultimately good or meaningful. The joy he brought to others through his work, the help he gave people after rehabilitation, the friendships and bonds he formed, the fun and excitement he experienced, his own suffering and sacrifice. Do these things outweigh the pain and toxicity he otherwise brought into the world? And are any one of those things the key to a meaningful existence? This brings us back to the themes of Siddhartha, which very much grapples with these big picture meaning of life questions. Ultimately, the book determines that there isn't one specific aspect of life that makes it meaningful. Rather, it's a combination of all life has to offer that helps you attain understanding. This also ties into the larger themes of the final 8 episodes of BoJack. We see Diane grapple with these same ideas in Good Damage and repeat them again in Nice While It Lasted. We even see it in action in Xerox of a Xerox. Todd and Princess Carolyn struggle with their complicated relationships with BoJack, but ultimately their reflection on that relationship leads them to a greater understanding of what they want want in life. PC seems genuinely happy to be with those who are most important to her, Ruthie and Judah. Todd's reflections help him decide that moving into his own place with Maud is the best way to move forward in his life. Their past experiences help determine their trajectory. I think the most interesting thing about this dinner conversation is that we know the entire episode takes place in BoJack's mind. The questions that all of these characters pose also reflect different aspects of BoJack himself. It simultaneously explores all of the characters who have passed on and BoJack. When Secretariat shows up, the conversation turns to suicide, and Herb admits he considered killing himself after he was fired from horsing around. Ultimately, Herb continued to find simple reasons to stay on Earth. Secretariat criticizes him for lack of follow-through and relishes in his own decision to end life on his own terms. To me, this is a reflection of BoJack's feelings on the subject. There are 3 events in the series that could be perceived as suicide attempts from BoJack. Back in season 3, he let go of the wheel of his car on the highway and also drove that same car into his pool. And then in season 6, he goes swimming while overly inebriated, leading to this very episode. In the highway incident, he gives himself leeway to change his mind, and ultimately, he does. He doesn't choose a method that would end his life instantaneously. In both pool incidents, he gives himself further outs. He drives his car into the pool during a huge party, and it would be expected for somebody to pull him out of the pool. When he goes drunk swimming, he calls Diane, effectively begging her to tell him not to go swimming. In every perceived suicide attempt, BoJack seeks a way out. He isn't fully committed. Herb's story seems to be BoJack acknowledging this about himself, while Secretariat's seems to be him questioning if he's weak for not following through. Dinner finishes with BoJack finally giving his best part of his life, being young, hanging with Herb, and trying to figure out life. BoJack's best part was the time after his toxic childhood and before future toxic decision-making plagued his life, before he started to make the kinds of mistakes that he couldn't take back. The event of the evening is of course the big show, where all of our dinner guests perform in honor of BoJack Horseman. This sequence is so jam-packed with callbacks and brilliant imagery, and it all starts out with Sarah Lynn's reprise of Don't Stop Dancing. The original version was of course played in season 5's 11th episode Showstopper. For the performance, Sarah Lynn is wearing a variation of the outfit she wore at Herb's funeral, this one sporting white flourishes, making it a little bit more angelic. This makes a lot of sense, as in a way, this entire episode is sort of a funeral for BoJack. The lyrics read, "Life is a never-ending show, old sport, except the minor details that it ends. The overture's a lifetime, but the show is short, here with all your family and friends. You run the race, you blurt your lines, they put your face on shirts and shrines and giant signs 1,000 feet tall, and don't stop dancing till the curtain call." This effectively describes the life of a celebrity like BoJack or Sarah Lynn, how they do their job and are put on a pedestal. And when you're thrust into the public eye as entertainment, you're pressured to keep performing until you're dead. The second verse transitions into a remix/mashup with Sarah Lynn's song Prickly Muffin and speaks to legacy. Shows are a never-ending life, of course, a silhouette that stays when you are gone. What use is the struggle and the strife, old horse? End it, and your legacy lives on. The idea that your art will outlive you is really interesting, especially in regards to your legacy. Sarah Lynn had toxic traits and behavior, and she died tragically young. But because of her death, her legacy shines a bright, positive light on her. BoJack has lived such a long life since his early success and completely tainted his legacy. He's grappling with the idea that if he hadn't gone on living, his legacy would have had a positive impact, and he wouldn't have caused as much pain and suffering. The chatter stops, the crowd departs, a needle drops, the music starts. A song you taught me when I was small. A song you taught me when I was small is directly referencing 2 things in BoJack Horseman. The obvious one is this harsh lesson BoJack gave Sarah Lynn when she was young.
You don't stop dancing, and you don't stop smiling, and you give those people what they want.
But interestingly, this exact same idea was hammered into BoJack by his own mother when he was young.
You've got an audience out there, and they want to hear you sing.
These are essentially the same lesson. You perform until nobody wants to see you perform anymore. And this lesson was incredibly detrimental to both BoJack and Sarah Lynn's development as people. Sarah Lynn ends her performance, falling into the door on stage and disappearing into the abyss. Next to the stage is Corduroy Jackson Jackson doing an aerial dance on a ribbon reflective of the way he died. It's short, but it's haunting, especially here where his body goes limp before swinging through the door and into the abyss. Next is Zach Braff, and while this was mostly played for laughs, I think some of the things he said are still relatively profound. Loss is a collaborative art between the people who leave us and those who remain. We dance with the shadows of their absence. I think if we're feeling a significant amount of loss, a lot of what we do can be dictated by those feelings. If you're feeling the loss of a relationship or friendship, you might avoid doing things that remind you of those people. Zach's fall into the abyss is definitely played for laughs as he tongue twists his way through the things he never got a chance to do before before death. While the tongue twister is funny, I think we can all relate to the fear of leaving this world before we've accomplished the things we've set out to do. While Zach Braff takes the stage, BoJack and Secretariat take a smoke break. The conversation returns to whether life has meaning or purpose, or if true peace is attainable. If Secretariat could start his life over again, he says he wouldn't care as much, because ultimately everyone ends up in the exact same place. And as we know, this means that BoJack is pondering this exact same question. Secretariat briefly transitions into being Butterscotch again and tells BoJack that he really did care about BoJack and Beatrice. I think the saddest and most profound thing about this moment is that we don't actually know if Butterscotch felt this way. It's essentially how BoJack hopes his father felt about him. BoJack laments that they never had any conversations like this when he was alive. But, as we know, they never had any conversations like this at all. Next, we get to the titular View from Halfway Down, Secretariat's poem about jumping off the George Rogers Clark Memorial Bridge in Louisville. This poem obviously describes Secretariat's mindset as he jumped off that bridge, and how his perspective changed on the way down. The first verse describes Secretariat's mindset as he prepares to jump. The second describes that shift in his perspective as he sees the water approaching. It's all okay, it would be, were you not now halfway down. The third verse describes the last-minute flailing and thrashing in hopes that he'll survive the fall. The final verse is all about that immense regret he feels now that it's almost over, and how he wishes he'd known the view from halfway down before he jumped, before Secretariat too falls into the abyss. This line of thinking is reaffirmed by many people who have survived suicide attempts like this one, as many say that on their way down, they feel regret and hope to survive the fall. One of my favorite details about this sequence is how the door to the abyss actually chases the Secretariat. After the first verse, it's on the far side of the stage, and each subsequent verse it moves closer and closer, much like the water approaching Secretariat as he fell. Secretariat's method of death wasn't instantaneous, but he also couldn't take it back, so we see his impending death approach him, even as he regrets his decision. This performance is also reflective of BoJack's journey through his near-death experience. He's just realized what exactly he's experiencing, recognizing that he might not be waking up. He's metaphorically halfway down and subsequently starts to verbalize that same regret that Secretariat laid out in his poem. The final performance of the evening is Crackerjack and Beatrice. Beatrice does a ribbon dance while Crackerjack plays I Will Always Think of You on the trumpet, a song that he used to sing with their mother, Honey. During the climax of the performance, Beatrice says, "Now the hard part," before leaping into the air. After she performs the leap and before going through the door herself, she says, "And now the easy part." I think this is meant to represent that life itself is the hard part, and death, that's easy. As she spins in the air, her ribbon wraps her in a cocoon. Crackerjack ties the other end around his waist and jumps through the door. The tar from the abyss seeps back up the ribbon and stains the ribbon cocoon, which then unravels entirely. It falls to the ground and is then pulled through the door itself. This represents how Crackerjack's death tainted the remainder of Beatrice's life, which subsequently unraveled. As we know, Crackerjack's death led to their mother, Honey Sugarman, being lobotomized, direly affecting the remainder of Beatrice's life. This is all very creatively represented by the unraveling ribbon that surrounded Beatrice. She never really came back from it. Following their performance, Herb introduces BoJack himself, listing out all of his insecurities. Husband to no one, father to no one that we know of, crippling alcoholic, and a stupid piece of shit. The last was obviously a reference to the season 4 episode of the same title, which showcases BoJack's insecurities through his inner monologue. He asks Herb if it's terrifying, and Herb says everything must come to an end before placing his hand through the door, showing that the darkness has turned into the same dripping tar from throughout the episode. BoJack says, "See you on the other side."
Oh, BoJack, no. There is no other side. This is it.
BoJack is all alone once again, a recurring event in his life, usually because of his own toxic behaviors. He walks up for his final performance, but panics, running through the house, desperate to call Diane. As he runs, the tar chases him and begins oozing throughout the house. When he gets back to the living room, we see that even the paintings and photos of him are oozing tar, often very specifically from the image of BoJack himself, reinforcing that fear instilled in him by Charlotte. After the clown painting opens up into the horse and around kitchen, the bird tries to escape the window before being consumed by BoJack's tar, the final omen. BoJack grabs the phone and talks to Diane, begging her to save him. This is when he remembers what happened. Diane didn't pick up the phone. He quickly shifts from panic to calm. He slowly walks outside, looking over the bridge down into his own body in his pool. As he looks down, we see the cord to the phone is wrapped around his neck, a very deliberate image showing that BoJack twisted himself into this situation. He talks to Diane, but as we know, he's really just talking to himself. In his last moments as he accepts his fate, he just wants to talk to Diane, his best friend. His conversation with her seems to stem from one they had back in season 2's episode Yes and, when Diane was at her lowest point, crashing at BoJack's house for months. She says she wishes she could go home to Mr. Peanut Butter and not have to explain anything.
He would just say, "How was your day?" I would just say, "My day was good."
In these last moments, BoJack just wants to ask Diane how she's doing and not have to explain anything.
How was your day? My day was good.
He just wants to be present with someone he cares about. As he listens to Diane, he lets the tar consume him, accepting his fate and accepting his mortality. As the screen goes to black, we hear the heart rate monitor flatline, but if we watch the credits in their entirety, we hear it start to beep once more, hinting that he hasn't quite met his ultimate fate. BoJack's journey through his near-death experience showcased his own grappling with his past, the meaning of life, and his own mortality. Through this experience, BoJack comes to a greater understanding of himself and of what a meaningful life means for him. The important thing about this episode isn't that BoJack did or didn't die. The important thing is that BoJack accepted his own mortality. BoJack opened his eyes and took a peek at his own view from halfway down. Unlike Secretariat, BoJack survived and is given one more chance. And just maybe, this deeper understanding will lead BoJack to live a less selfish, more fulfilling life. Hey, thank you all so much for tuning into this breakdown of BoJack Horseman's incredible The View from Halfway Down. If you like this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe because there are about a dozen more episodes of BoJack that I'm really excited to analyze in a similar way, so stay tuned for those. Thanks for watching. Peace.
Johnny! Two cellos!